So I think and hope that we are going to have a very interesting discussion, because this discussion is going to be about us, that who we are as human beings and how we understand anything, because that tells us who we are. So this word hermeneutics may be a little bit new, especially in Pakistan, but basically what it is, theory of understanding, meaning how do we understand reality, or how do we understand texts, or how do we understand anything. So certainly it is not that simple that we look at something and we understand what it is. We go through a process, and that process helps us sometimes understand correctly and sometimes understand incorrectly. Hermeneutics tells us that humans beings do nothing except interpretation. This is a very bold statement and a conclusion that humanity has come. That whether it is science, whether it is religion, whether it is our emotions, whether it is our relationships, whether it is reality, anything we do, we only interpret. So this is a very interesting understanding as a human beings we have come to. So basically there are three things involved when we try to understand, let's just say, reality. So what is reality? I am a being, and this body of mine is the circle in which I exist. So anything which is in this body is me, and anything outside this body is reality that confronts my consciousness and forces me to understand it. So therefore this is my situation as an individual, but we all are faced with this, that there is an environment in which we exist, and in that environment or in that nature or in that reality there is a small circle in which I exist or you exist. So when we look further that how do we understand reality, so we find that there are three things, two other things that are involved. First is the thought, and the other is the language. So we will try to understand the process of understanding, and we will try to understand the limits of human understanding. And the bad news is that these limits will not change, no matter who we become or no matter how scientifically we become sophisticated. These things are not going to change, because this is how we understand. So one definition of reality, I said that okay, I am part of the reality, but there is a circle in which I exist, and I differentiate between myself and whatever exists outside me. Another example of reality which the philosophers use is that anything that exists, whether I exist or a human mind exists or not, that is reality. Okay. So for example, I have an idea of Minar-e-Pakistan. Okay. That idea exists only as long as I exist in my mind. But as far as the reality of that object is concerned, it exists whether I exist or not. So it's a very simple test of reality, that it is not dependent on human mind, it exists on its own. So we will take the example of an apple, because apple is something that exists in reality, and we will use how we understand apple to understand or know the process of understanding. When I look at an apple, what I see is that this object, which is not me, has some color, usually red color, or a shape, or a weight, or some smell. So when I look at the apple, all these thoughts come to my mind. So there are thoughts in my mind, and there is the actual apple that exists. Now, once I look at that apple in this way in my mind or in my thought, what I see is that if you combine all these abstract qualities of the apple, then that is something which is called apple. So the first thing is this, that my understanding of the apple is only an insight, because I really don't know what is an apple. The reason is this, that apple exists in reality as a combined or organic whole of all those characteristics. In reality, I cannot say, okay, this is the color of the apple, and this is the shape of the apple, and this is the weight of the apple. I cannot do that. So therefore, human mind can never understand reality as it is, because the way we understand, and the way we understand is that we break up the reality into its components, we then put them together, and then we have some insight, and the purpose of that insight is so that we can live a life. So everything we do, we do it because we want to live a life. Okay. Now, how does language come into this process of understanding? Language comes in because when I look at the real apple in the reality, I have to give it a name, and in English we give it a name of APPLE. So that is a linguistic symbol. When the people who understand English, they looked at this word APPLE, their minds tells them, okay, this is that object which has these properties and that exists in nature. So the only way one human mind can talk with the other human mind is through language. Otherwise, communication cannot happen. We agree on symbols of the language, and since you and I have the same agreement on that symbol in that language, so therefore when I say apple, it doesn't matter that apple has to be there. The word apple creates the reality in your mind of an apple. Now, what if you can say that no, I can think without giving a name. For example, a child, the child doesn't have a language, but he or she can understand everything what's going around. That is possible, but that is limited, and I will tell you why. So for example, if I want to think something about an apple which is on the top of a table, okay, if I don't give the name apple, and if I don't give that thing on which apple is exists, on which it exists, called table, I really cannot think more complex things, because if I don't have the words apple and table, what will happen is this, that I will have to think, oh, that thing which is round and has a usually red color and weighs this much, that thing is on another thing which has 4 legs and it is made up of, even when I say wood, there is a problem because I have used a symbol of language. Okay. So therefore, we really cannot think deeply about things, and we cannot communicate without the use of language. So now you see how reality, thought, and language, they are related together in how we understand reality. So now let's take an example that how can I misunderstand? No, let's talk about the limits of our understanding. So certainly by this example which I have given, one thing is for sure, that the human lower limit on understanding is this, that we cannot understand reality as it exists, and we will never be able to do that, because it is an integral whole, and our mind can only understand when we break that reality into components and have some insight, because we don't know how the wholeness of that apple is. So this is the lower limit of human understanding. No matter how much scientifically we advance, we will never know the ontology or the existence of apple the way it exists. So this is the lower limit of understanding. What is the upper limit of understanding? So the upper limit of understanding is whatever I can think, I can know. Whatever I cannot think, I cannot know. If I can think of chair, I can know a chair. If I can think of any other thing, even if that thing doesn't exist, okay, as long as I can think about it, I can understand it. For example, I can say that there is a elephant the size of a dog. Now this is an impossibility of the real world, but this is an actuality of my ideal world, or the world of my ideas, because that elephant, which is of the size of a dog, really exists in my mind, but it cannot exist in the outside reality. Okay, so if I can think of that, so I can talk about it, and I can create, some things that cannot exist in the reality. I can even think about things that I cannot even imagine. So for example, if I say that there is a rectangle, there is a rectangle in the shape of a circle. I cannot even imagine that how that rectangle can be in the shape of a circle. But since I can think about it, so you see our world of ideas is much bigger than the reality that exists itself. However, the limit is this, that if I cannot think, I cannot know that thing. The good news is that our upper limit of understanding always keeps on increasing. That apple that we saw and we wanted to know so that we can live a life, maybe we can eat or produce or do whatever. Otherwise, we have no interest in that apple. So therefore, when I think about that apple, you see what has happened is this, that just like computer, the actual reality does not has to be there, but I can create my own reality in my mind. Okay, and the discussion we had was that when we look at that apple in the reality, what we see is that we interpret it, because we cannot know it. It is an interpretation. It is some insight that we can talk about it, okay, or live a life, So this is another thing, that we only do interpretation. So you will say, well, science deals with facts. How could that be interpretation? Science is nothing but interpretation. The only thing is that we have a method that we can verify, and then we can believe, but we can never believe absolutely, because there may be some new knowledge that comes, and we may know something more about that. So, many years ago, when the apple exists, okay, so you have an insight, and you can talk about apple or eat that apple. But now our understanding of the apple is that, okay, it is an organic material. It has bonds, organic bonds, and then the atoms are electrons and neutrons, and then we have the elementary particles and this and that. So the whole universe is made of that. Right now, the quantum physics has come to this conclusion that actually reality doesn't exist. It is changing every moment. It creates and destructs, it creates. So it is a dynamic thing. It is not something that exists out there. So therefore, this upper limit of understanding is fixed for us, for example, today, but it may increase as we move forward. And the thing with the human beings is that we have infinite potential of knowing. This potential can never finish. So Allama Iqbal, he once said that, I will just say what he meant, that God, I don't like your heaven, because I will be bored. If all day I'm sitting there and eating and doing whatever, I will be bored. I like this world where there is, a struggle, and I know and I grow. So what he is implying is, and I think Quran is very clear about it, that it is not that we will be sitting in the in Jannah and doing nothing. There will be unlimited levels of growth that will take place over there. And the biggest regret that people will have is, for example, the people who go in the hell, the biggest regret will be that the potential we had, we have lost it. Now we cannot grow. So this, this is how big the human potential of knowing is. There is no limit to it. However, since we are finite human beings, therefore at one point in time we know, but at the next point we know more. So therefore, this is how we understand reality. Like I said, reality is something that exists whether or not human mind exists. So it is an object of nature. But there is another kind of objects that we call cultural objects. How do we understand cultural objects? So what is a cultural object? For example, wood exists in nature, but chair does not exist in nature. It is a creation of human culture. Okay. Somebody, who has given birth to some animal, that exists, but mother does not exist. We have called that person mother or father. So all the things that we create, whether it is painting or music or texts or whatever else, they are all cultural products. They are the product of human mind. Okay, so fundamentally our object of understanding is very different from the object of nature. What's the difference? When I look at a text, what do I see? Well, I see some words, and actually those are sound symbols. So a text is nothing but it is a speech fixed in words. When I sound those words, I recreate that speech. See? But there is a big problem or difference between speech and text, because when I am speaking, you are available to me, whoever is speaking with me, in the same socio-historic context. If I don't understand something, I can ask you, okay, or you can get a clarification from me. But as far as text is concerned, I have nothing but some symbols on a piece of paper. I cannot go to the author and ask, did I understand correctly? Because the author is dead once the text has come into being. So therefore, this is what they call in that birth of the reader and death of the author. So the birth of the reader is this, that let's say it's one paragraph from Shakespeare. The people who speak English, they can read what it is. They have no problem of reading that language, but do they understand? It's difficult to understand when we try to read Shakespeare, because I can sound those words, but how those words were so long ago, I really cannot understand, or I have to be trained for it. So therefore, we have another problem in understanding text. That then For example, if there is a professor of English who is an expert in Shakespeare, and he reads that text or she reads that text, and when somebody who has nothing to do with Shakespeare reads that text, the understanding will be very, very different. Nothing has changed, the reader has changed. Okay. So, what do we think of text? And this applies to all the arts, that if there is a sculpture, do I need to know what the author of that or the creator of that sculpture was thinking when he or she made that sculpture? Because only thing I have is I can look at the sculpture. Okay. So, definitely that sculpture points us in certain directions. For example, if it is smooth or what kind of material is used, but we have to interpret it, and the interpretation depends on who I am. Okay. So, that means, and it's a very bad news, there is absolute subjectivity, because we all understand differently. The only way we can come to a conclusion that, okay, this is what we agree in a discourse because we talk, the only way is this, that we sit down and I say, okay, I understand it this way, and you say, I understand it this way, and then I tell you these are the reasons I understand it, and you tell me the reasons, and then we can argue about it, and we can agree to some things that, okay, maybe you are right in this point, but I am not right in this point, or whatever. So, in a discourse, the meaning is always negotiated. For the individual, it is highly subjective, but we have to live in a society. So, we have to agree on that, okay, that this is chair and not a computer. Okay. So, therefore, we can talk about it, and we can discuss it, and we can come to a conclusion. But there are two problems when we negotiate the meaning. One problem is this, that our understanding of that object may change in future because of our knowledge. So, no understanding is absolute. No understanding is absolute, because it's always subject to change. Okay. And the second problem is this, and that's we have recently come to understand, that in any discourse there is a power dimension. Discourse means power dimension. So, if it is a child and a parent, or a husband and wife, or you and I, there is a power dimension. You have accepted me as an authority right now. Okay. I have power over you in that sense, that maybe I am wrong, but I can make you think, okay, no, I am right, and you may accept it. So, the problem with the mutual understanding is this, that human understanding is never fixed, and usually there is a power dimension, meaning that even though we may agree that this is what exactly it is, the powerful will decide what meaning will be accepted. See? So, therefore, this is the issue, or these are the issues in understanding text. The issue also becomes that, yes, there is one more point, that when I look at the symbols or of the language, for example, Apple, it creates an image. Okay. So, when I am trying to understand text, the first thing I see is a symbol, linguistic symbol. But when I am trying to understand reality, the first thing I see is a thing that really exists. Okay. So, what is the process? So, I look at the apple, I give it a linguistic symbol called apple, and then I have some inside of image or of that apple. So, this is the process of understanding reality. Well, what is the process of understanding text? The first thing I see is the linguistic symbol. So, the moment I see the linguistic symbol, I right away interpret that this is what the symbol is. Now, if I make a mistake in interpreting that symbol, I will definitely misunderstand. So, therefore, the question is this, that if we have a text which is 1400 years old and we looked at that linguistic symbol and we want to understand, how should we understand? Well, they will tell you we have the history of how the words was used, or we have the history, how it was used in that language at that time. This doesn't work, because history can never be recreated. Reality can never be recreated. History is like a sea, and when we want to see something, as if we have a torch in that sea. So wherever we point our torch, we see, but we cannot see the whole sea. And history is written by the powerful. We know that. So therefore, there is a big issue. And then when it comes to interpretation, and especially when that interpretation has to do with the reality of living a life, and also that, we have an issue. So therefore, the purpose of this talk was that, as a human being, we have to realize that we cannot know the reality 100%, no matter how we know ourselves or the things we believe, because we are born in a tradition. That tradition is made by human beings, and that tradition goes through power dimension. So therefore, we cannot accept tradition without criticizing it. We don't want to abandon the tradition because it has the knowledge or the importance of the learned lessons. So we don't want to say, okay, we don't believe in tradition, but we have to understand, we have to criticize that tradition before we accept it. So that is one implication. And then we also must understand that all we do is interpret, and we can interpret correctly and incorrectly. So like, who's the wisest person? So I think it was Socrates who he says the wisest person is the one who understands that he don't know or she don't know, because we don't know, but we are so firm in our beliefs and in our culture, in our traditions, that we feel that everybody else is wrong. This is not how it is, because we all are going through. Our situation in this life is that there is a sea, and all of us have been thrown in this sea. Now we have to struggle to make sure we don't drown. And we all have to do that. As a matter of fact, everything in the universe has to do that. Even the stars, because the death, the creation cannot escape the death. So we are all trying to survive. So the end result is this, that we have to be more humble, and we have to be more understanding that we could be wrong. Okay, and there is a saying that I was trying to find my enemy, and it turns out I am the enemy. So, and usually that is the case. We blame everybody else except ourselves. So I think now maybe we can have some question answers, and maybe some of the things that were not clear, or some of the new thoughts that have come, we can talk about that. And then we have to see that where we go from here, because this discussion has to start in Pakistan.
So on Facebook Live, we have a question from Shamami, who's asking, how would this argument of no absolute truth or understanding help us become better leaders to others when facing conflict?
That we understand first that I can be wrong, and also what is truth actually? I mean, this is also a question. You see, the truth doesn't exist independent of us. We are in the process of finding the truth. We live in a dynamic life. The universe is dynamic. The universe is in the process of revealing itself. We ourselves don't know who we are, because the way we live our life and the way we work and what we do, that reveals us who we are and who we are becoming and who we can become. So the truth, nobody can know the absolute truth except God. So finite human beings, they know truth, but that truth is in the process of revealing. When we were a child, we know something else. Now we know something else. So it is the process of revelation, and the universe itself is in the process of revelation, revealing itself. Like Allama Iqbal said, "Ke aa rahi hai sadaye kun fayakun damadam," or something like that. That at every moment, new command of creation is coming, and this is exactly the Qur'anic point is. That Allah Ta'ala has new shan every moment, and the universe is nothing but a reflection of His shan. So therefore, we have to be humble, and we have to think that we may be wrong. And leadership is about being a servant leader. It is not about leading; it is about serving.
And sir, do we have a distinction between something that doesn't exist and something that we don't know about?
Like I said, if we cannot think about something, but it can exist. For example, we didn't know about fundamental particles, okay, because we could not think about it, but they exist. Okay, so it is very likely that therefore, like I said, that reality is in the process of revealing to the humanity also. The humanity is increasing its knowledge of truth. So therefore, yes, there could be a situation that we don't know, but it can exist. We just cannot say that because I know, so therefore, that's all that exists. We cannot say that.
But isn't there like an objective reality to things, like knowing the existence of things may be subjective? I totally understand that. But the essence of things, like the characteristics they have, can't they be an objective truth?
Yeah. So that's the implication. Now, what about the objective truth? And unfortunately, the modernity told us that we can know the truth objectively, and we have come to the conclusion that the existence of a subject disturbs the objectivity. This is scientific fact. Physics has proved that when you are doing an experiment, just because of the presence of a consciousness will change the results. So the differentiation between subject and object, it has diffused. That doesn't mean that objectivity doesn't exist. What it means is this, that we cannot say that I absolutely know or 100% objectively know. Like I said, we don't know actually. We actually have insights. And therefore, this is another thing that we construct our reality, who we are. We construct our reality based on our experience. So if we construct our reality, we can deconstruct it also. Okay. So therefore, again, it's a question of interpretation. For those things which are necessary to live life, yes, we know apple. We don't need to know exactly what is the integral whole of the apple. So because our mind is such that if there is a need to know, only then it asks the question. If there is no need to know, it will not ask the question. So just an example, if I know that every time I am here and I go and I can get a book, and one day what happens is this, that I am going and I hit something over here. The moment I hit that, I will ask, what happened? So when our reality changes, that's when the question is raised, and that's what is the beginning of knowledge, because now we want to know what happened. You see, so yeah, I mean, there is certainly objectivity, and but when we are saying that at the physical level there is no objectivity, boundaries of objectivity and subjectivity scientifically, we are all then who we think we are and who we construct to be who we are. So it's in our hand.
It's like the more I know, I don't know.
Yes. Yeah, that's correct. the nature of our not knowing is so great, but we feel so confident that we know. That's the problem.
So I have a quick question. So you said that there are two kinds of objects. There are cultural objects and then there is objects in nature. So I understand that there is no objective reality when we talk about cultural objects because it's a completely social construction as humans are. But in terms of natural objects, I'm having a hard time understanding that there's no... I'm having a hard time understanding how we phrase it. So for example, for thousands of years we believed that the Earth was the center of the universe, and that the Earth was flat. But then, once Copernicus and Galileo proved otherwise, would we say that our reality changed, or would we say that our interpretation?
Actually, you have given the answer yourself. The reason is this: like I said, that our knowledge is increasing. When our knowledge is increasing, the reality that exists, it changes. So if there was an absolute fact, then we should have known that. But the problem is this, that we are in the process of revealing on ourselves as an individual and as a humanity. So therefore, then we know. At some point we didn't know, but at some point we now know. And who knows what we know in future, you know.
So let's say that in the future we come to know that the Earth actually is flat, let's say. So then, would that then become our reality?
Yeah, it will become your reality, subject to change. Because right now, according to physics, the reality is it's empty space. Okay, there's nothing, and we interpret. And Allama Iqbal says that the reality is so fast changing that when we look at that reality, this is what we see, because our brain cannot follow that change. So that's already an interpretation. This is what I'm saying, that it's so interesting. In psychology, you have similar physiological response when you are fearful or when you are happy. Okay, but it depends. You interpret it as a good thing or a bad thing. Physiologically, you don't know. It's the same thing. So what can you say about this thing, that even what is happening to us, even what I feel firsthand, I have to interpret what it is.
So one last question. So essentially, you can only say that our interpretation of reality is changing, but reality itself isn't changing. We just don't know what it is.
We are in the process of finding reality, and therefore we have to accept our finitude, that we don't know, and we are open to what the reality is. Yeah.
Thank you.
How can we be sure of reality? Right? Like, let's say if it's revealing itself bit by bit, how do we measure or understand that what we've discovered right now is true?
We don't. We only know at this point.
So we're in a state of uncertainty throughout.
Yes, and it's at the physical level. The uncertainty principle, that even in physical measurement, when you try to measure the distance and the space of a particle, you cannot determine that. Heisenberg's the principle. So yeah, there is reality. This is what it is. This is what hermeneutics is. Hermeneutics, Heidegger is a German philosopher. He died in 1976. He is the really biggest name in this. He said that what are we doing philosophic, that has nothing to do with my life. So what has to do with me is the being in the world, and how this being knows and what it being does. So it all started from that the philosophy has to come back to the human world, and not into the world where we do not have anything except what you call speculation. So the philosophy has changed very much. We now deal with the physical, actual reality which is on the earth, that who we are and how do we live.
In terms of decision making, then, if we're in a state of uncertainty, then how should decisions be made?
Yes.
Based on evidence that we've received.
Yes, this is another problem. that there can never be a human situation where you know all the facts, where you have all the information and you make a decision. That never happens. We make decisions when we are confused. We make decisions when our emotions are there, when there are prejudices we have. We make decisions in that. This is what life is, that there is uncertainty and we have to act in that uncertainty. And when we act in that certainty, we find out whether we acted good or bad, and based on that we continue. So we can keep going in a bad direction or we can keep going in a good direction, but we can come back also. But this is what it is. There is no absoluteness in the sense that human beings make decisions that I know everybody. That doesn't exist. This is the reason. I just give you an example I give to my students. All of us are very, very honest. There is no question about that. We are all very, very honest. But if there is $1 billion and nobody is seeing and nobody can find out, we will find out who is honest. You see, this is a very important thing, that the morality exists in a concrete situation. Morality, if the concrete human situation is not there, there is no morality. We are all very good and truthful.
So reality is what we make of it, what we see. I mean, how we interpret it. I mean, a reality can look different to two different people.
Yes. Because your life experiences are such that there were certain things and it has shaped you. You can change, but first you have to become aware of it. Yes, aware of it, that I see it like this. Well, you see it like this because this is how your experience is. Once you realize that there could be other experiences and you look from the other side, then you can change that. Yes, self-correction, this is what it is, self-correction as you walk.
How does one learn to do self-correction, and how do you realize that you are wrong?
How do you realize?
We are all so sure about things.
Okay. Well, you can never be sure, but I can tell you this, that when you do wrong, you know. Okay. No, you do not have to have a scientific formula or go through a logic. You know I have done something wrong. Maybe you don't know how, but you feel it.
Stay connected there.
No, you have to question yourself. What did I do and why? Yeah.
How can this idea of total uncertainty throughout relate to the human satisfaction?
First of all, there is no total, because the truth has to be there and we have to find the truth. The only thing we are saying is this, that we cannot be in the possession of absolute truth, and the truth to us is increasing. I never said that we can never have or there does not exist any truth without relativity. As a person, yes, but in a world in which we live, we come to a conclusion that this exists and this may not exist, or whatever the case may be. And your question was?
That how does this uncertainty relate to human satisfaction? Like, as humans, if you believe that everything around you is relative, what you said about total subjectivity, so you believe that the reality around you is uncertain, how would you satisfy yourself with this truth?
First thing you have to then understand is this, that I could be wrong. That's the first thing. And then it is a process, it is a path. It is not one day thing that, today I have known this knowledge, so therefore I am fine for the rest of my life. It doesn't happen that way, because every step you take, that determines that you can correct yourself or not. And sometimes you take steps that go so far away that even if you want, you are not able to correct. So you have to, the other thing is this, how do I know human beings? Well, we know that, how do we know text? How do we know reality? How do I know the other mind? Okay, so if I want to know Anam, how do I know? Should I weigh her? Should I, do all the physical measurements, this and that? Would I know anything about her? No, I won't know nothing. I can only know Anam in the things and the acts she has done. As a matter of fact, Anam is also finding out who she is by the way she is acting, because she also don't know who she is. And in the doing of act, that's why Islam say full what you act and what you do, there has to be a reason, and you better be sure of that reason. And we can make mistake. Even when we are sure, we can make mistake. Yeah.
So you said that the truth is slowly revealed to us, and that reminds me of this theory I read a long time back. I think it's called dialectic. So humanity is in a constant state of dialectic, and so we make mistakes collectively, and then we figure out later on.
Yeah, that's Marx.
Exactly. So that tells us that people prior to us knew less than the people right now. Is that what you mean when you say the truth is slowly revealed to us? Because I think that's a slippery slope. That sort of restricts us from accessing knowledge in the past. We're sort of arrogant in our sense of knowledge, that we know more than the past.
The arrogance is that if you try to judge the past based on what you know today, that's not allowed in history. Okay, what you know today, and you say, well, how stupid those people were. Okay, because they didn't know. They have to act in what they know. So therefore, what was the crux?
I just want to find out whether you subscribe to that idea.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, the material dialectic, which is that we go in one direction and then we correct and this and that. But the Islamic position is not that. It's not material. Actually, there is no material exists. It's only all spiritual. It's our mind that shows us material. Otherwise, there is the universe is spiritual. So the spirit has its own desires, its own goals. So the question of satisfaction. When you meet those goals, then you get satisfied. You don't get satisfied with what your culture is saying. So your culture is saying build this house and this and that. You can have that, but then you will find out you are not happy. This has happened in the West. They have everything, but they are not happy.
Should have been in my philosophy happiness course.
There was a question.
Yeah, there was a question. I was just going to ask that history based on Buddhism it's not like everything has been recorded for that matter. So you really can't say that history is an absolute factual, which is being told.
I can tell you this, that if you record on a video everything that has happened today, and if I ask you tomorrow, it is all question of interpretation, even if you can watch the video.
By the way, we're doing this so you can rewatch it and analyze how you think now.
So therefore, history, now we don't have this idea of history, that history is in the past. The present is the history. That's when the history is being written. Okay, so we have some voices from the past, and we don't 100% trust them. We criticize them. Okay, and if we have material evidence, yeah, then we can be bit sure of it.
Is it important to criticize, like to be very analytical, or rather than accepting something and then working on it? Which is a better way to go about it?
The only better way is, or the only way we can work is that we accept, and then we go from there, because we are born in a tradition. I am born here in USA, so that has changed everything.
People look at the same thing differently because reality isn't absolute, it doesn't exist. So how do we define the concepts of rightness and something which is wrong?
Again, I did not say that the reality does not exist. I said that reality exists and we are in the process of knowing and finding it out. Okay, so that's the one. Why? Because I exist, and I also know that what I am not also exists, because it is confronting me, right? So this is an existential question, because I exist and I have to face that reality which is coming out to me. Now, as far as absolute truth is concerned, absolute truth exists in universals, and universal does not exist in the particularity of life. Just give you an example. You can say cats are very beautiful. You can say that. But when you are in the real world, you have to point to the cat, or you have to gather all the cats in the world, and then you can say the cats are beautiful. This is the particularity. So therefore, universals don't exist in that sense. It is the creation of our mind. It is an idea of our mind.
For being here and giving us insights on hermeneutics, and probably maybe confusing us, and living with that confusion is a very painful experience. I've experienced it myself. In any case, I circulated a sheet of emails and names. Have you guys all signed up for it? Okay. So Accessible Academics, as I said earlier, is an educational initiative, and under that we're offering talks like these on new topics, and just so that whatever is outside Pakistan intellectually comes here back in Pakistan as well, and the general people are informed about it. And under this, we're also offering courses that are philosophy based. We're also having reading clubs. And so, for example, we choose a book and then we start reading it together as a group. We critique it and we understand it together. And so we have that aspect. And then we have life enhancement courses, for example, on emotional intelligence or body language, for example. So we have a lot coming up, and I'm only saying this for because I want you guys to follow Accessible Academics on Facebook, so that we can keep posted on whatever we're doing and the events that we're holding.